All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the show. I'm your host, Daniel Cody, and this is where I give commentary and reviews on all things wrestling. Before I get started, I want to say this real quick. Friday, I did two videos in the same night. One was a review on Friday Night SmackDown, where whoever lost had to kneel, and it got 5 views. However, I did my thoughts on Eddie Kingston and CM Punk, and I gave my thoughts about that incredible promo that was cut that night. That video alone is now up to 106 videos with 3 likes. And I say that to say this. First of all, thank you all so much for those views. I also want to say it's almost symbolic because it shows where fans are as far as a lot of people think that AEW is the head show over WWE. But we're a fan of both, and I'm not so radical that I'm going to wish harm to former stars like some of the fans did Brian Danielson, should I say. But I say all that to say, number one, thank you guys so much for your views that Friday. I really appreciate it. That being said, today is another special day. Yesterday was Keith Lee's birthday, and I did my top 5 favorite matches from him, as well as my thoughts on his release. Today is extra special. Today is the birthday of Chris. Welcome to Tuesday is Jericho. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today is the birthday of Chris Jericho. And with that being said, I want to give my top 10 favorite matches that Chris Jericho had. Now, let's start off with number 9. No, number 10, I apologize. And that is Chris Jericho versus Cody Rhodes at AEW Full Gear for the AEW Heavyweight Championship. Now, in 2019, AEW was taking off. It was getting big. It was getting a lot of buzz, and it was awesome. And a lot of the stars you saw in WWE were coming there, and stars you saw on the independent scene and TNA were going there. It was awesome. This match was a great match in my personal opinion, and at the time, Cody Rhodes was accompanied by MJF, and MJF was Cody's supporter. However, despite the match being good, Cody did not win the match, which means he wouldn't challenge for the AEW Championship anymore. And to make matters worse, as great as the match was on Chris Jericho's part, MJF made his infamous heel turn that night. And what was hilarious was as he was walking up the ramp, somebody threw a cup at, I don't know what was in it, soda, water, juice, whatever, but somebody threw a cup full of juice at MJF and got it all over his suit. And then they showed the fan throwing more trash at him. That is passion, folks. I'm telling you. But back to the match. That match was good. Pretty good. It was lost. Jericho won because MJF threw in the towel. And MJF cost him, plot twist, the championship. And that was all part of his evil plans. And now no one can stand him. And quite frankly, I'm going to just say, I hope Darby Allin kicks his butt. But back to Chris Jericho. On Chris Jericho's end, Chris Jericho defended the championship successfully. So, kudos to him. My next top match on this list, coming in at number 9, is Chris Jericho versus Dean Malenko at WCW Uncensored. Now, as we all know, Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko had an amazing rivalry, even going back to the WCW days. But one of the things I found very funny was as I watched today the Monday Night Wars on Peacock, the episode of Monday is Jericho, they told Chris Jericho's story about how he came in as the guy fighting the good fight and things, but he didn't have a character. And when you don't have a character, people get bored of you and things like that. A wise man once said, if you're still, then your audience is still before you. That wise man just so happens to be one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. But either way, Chris Jericho didn't have a character. He finally made his heel turn after attacking Rey Mysterio that same year in 98. Shortly after putting Mysterio on the shelf for a leg injury, he would go on to have a rivalry with Dean Malenko, and that rivalry would start at WCW Uncensored. Part of those matches in that rivalry, I'm sorry. And it was a great technical match, an amazing technical match, a lot of great holds. And it's funny because Chris Jericho said, Dean Malenko we know as the man of 1,000 holds. Jericho was on television putting us all to sleep from a scripted standpoint, talking about his 1,009 holds. So he went hold number 1, armbar. Hold number 2, Jericho lock. Hold number 3, 5 hours later. What? God, he is still talking about that? Ugh. I mean, he just talked about all the holes. I'm thinking, by the time he gets to hole 1,000, Jesus will be back. But either way, no offense to the atheists and things of that nature. I just wanted to use humor. But either way, moving forward, not just yet, the match was great, but it was a match that saw Chris Jericho win via tap out through the walls of Jericho. And Dean Malenko took time off because he was on a pay-per-view losing streak. He came back several months later at WCW Slamboree as a disguised man, and he would defeat Chris Jericho that night. And Chris Jericho would get some more karma when Mysterio came back at the Great American Bash later that year. And, of course, Dean Malenko was there to see it at the end. Moving on to number 8 is AJ Styles versus Jericho at WrestleMania 32 in Dallas, Texas, back when Chris Jericho was still in WWE. Chris Jericho and AJ Styles had an amazing rivalry, and it was during the time where AJ Styles was just coming into WWE. He had been all over the world. The first time I saw him was in TNA in 07, but he finally came to WWE, and after the Royal Rumble, his first match was against Jericho. They had great matches, and they earned respect. So they became tag team partners, and Chris Jericho betrayed him. Now, this would also become a rematch for all the other losses that Chris Jericho had, including Fastlane, which was a great match that saw Chris Jericho, in an excellent effort, lose via submission to AJ Styles. But the match at WrestleMania was awesome. We saw the best of AJ Styles, and we saw the best of Chris Jericho with a code breaker, ending it all. But it was a great match, and it had to be great because they were in a record-breaking crowd that day. So, moving on to number 7, this is another WrestleMania match between Chris Jericho and Shawn Michaels. This match, and I know it shouldn't be at the bottom, but Chris Jericho apparently has had so many great matches. I didn't know what to put at which numbers, so I just thought, But either way, this was an excellent match, and even though Chris Jericho didn't win the match, he put on a great match, and he would end up getting the last word. We thought he was going to show sportsmanship, but he didn't. But of course, still, it was an amazing, amazing match from both men, and the dream match that lived up to the hype. So if you haven't seen that one, you don't know what you're missing. Moving on to number 6. Chris Jericho versus Kenny Nobis Omega. I have to say Nobis because I want to keep this channel PG to the best of my ability. But he wasn't known as Kenny Nobis then. He's known as Kenny Nobis now. But anyway, and we all know what B's stand for. But this was a great match on both sides. I'm going to tell you what I found entertaining. First off, Chris Jericho took a camera and recorded the crowd and Kenny Omega before Kenny spat on the camera. It kind of gave me the same vibes when The Rock held the camera while standing over Austin, only to turn around and get the fingers. But even though Kenny put on an amazing show before he was Kenny Nobis, that match was great. And what made it even more special was the ending as Chris Jericho demanded his thank you. A certain someone who had just left WWE came back to AEW as his Jon Moxley character. And speaking of Jon Moxley, my thoughts and prayers to him. Hope he rehabs. Hope guys, mental health is very important. So keep that in mind. Thoughts and prayers to Jon Moxley. Hope he heals fast, gets well soon, and we hope to see him back in AEW again, dropping people with DDTs. Or what's that move called? Because it's not Dirty Deeds anymore. But either way, that was an amazing match. And I also love the part where every time someone kicked out, the fans were like, "Too sweet! Whoop, whoop." That's funny. But nonetheless, the match in itself was awesome. Kenny Omega versus Chris Jericho, All or Nothing 2019. Number 5, we have a TLC match on an episode of SmackDown around late spring of 2001. This was a match, a 4-way tag TLC match between Jericho and Benoit, facing off against the Hardy Boys, Matt and Jeff, the Dudley Boys, Devon and Bubba Rayona Dudley, and of course, Edge and Christian. It was a great fatal 4-way match. It was just awesome. And we thought Chris Benoit would have to be carried out because he was going for his diving headbutt onto Matt Hardy through the table, missed, and Chris Jericho was left alone, so he was down. Somehow Chris Benoit was able to pull himself and come back, and thankfully both guys were able to win. Both guys were able to help each other win that tag team match, thus retaining their tag team championships. Also, we got to see Chris Jericho put the walls of Jericho on Edge, who was on top of the ladder at the time. But that fatal 4-way tag match on an episode of SmackDown, UPN back in the day, that was awesome. Check that out also. Speaking of Chris Benoit, that leads me to another ladder match that took place earlier that year. At number 4, we have Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit at the Royal Rumble 2001 ladder match. Now, for those of you who saw my review on my favorite matches with Edge, which I did for his birthday in October 30th, I said that 2001 hosted a lot of TLC and ladder matches. We saw a lot of ladder matches that year. We also saw a lot of ladder matches in 2002. But this was one of the early ladder matches to take place. Royal Rumble 2001. Before Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, two Canadians, were tag team partners, they were huge rivals. And they put, I'll say it like this, their rivalry in 2000 was awesome. 2000 had those two, Triple H and The Rock, and of course the triple threat rivalry with the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian. So great rivalries we got to see in 2000, and this was one of them. One of the greatest technical wrestlers, Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho, in the ladder match. Now, we'll never see WWE post this, not just because Chris Jericho is in AEW. That has nothing to do with it because Chris Jericho was on Stone Cold's podcast while signed with AEW. So, them not posting things has nothing to do with Jericho, but because of the incidents surrounding Chris Benoit later on in 2007. But that ladder match was great to see. It was awesome. Number 3, we have the Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle at AEW Revolution earlier this year. Now, I gotta say, it was a 4-on-4 match that went all over the buildings and everywhere else. But I tell you, that match was awesome. It all started. Remember when we started with Jericho versus Cody and MJF betraying Cody, and then after defeating Cody in Crooked Faction at a next pay-per-view, MJF would try and join the Inner Circle. And they were together for a little bit, and then MJF betrayed Chris Jericho, and so now and started the Pinnacle, and now the Inner Circle became faces because Chris Jericho in his early AEW career was heel. So now those two are fighting together, and it was great. Great showing by Sammy Guerrero, by the way. That was awesome. We were just totally awesome. He got the final decision, if I remember correctly. But the greatest memory is at the end, they won. The Inner Circle defeated the Pinnacle. We saw Conan in putting music together while they fought. That was good hard rock music mixed with rap, by the way. That was awesome. But nonetheless, I can't say enough about that match. It was awesome. You got to check that out. It happened earlier this year, but we got to try to find it again. It's just that cool. Speaking of MJF, that brings me to number 2. And that is Chris Jericho versus MJF at AEW All Out. A match that I was able to review. Some of you saw me review AEW All Out because that was when CM Punk appeared. Daniel Bryan came in. CM Punk's first match. Daniel Bryan and Adam Cole made their AEW debuts on that night, making that night extra special. But this match was a must-win for Chris Jericho because MJF on an episode of AEW Dynamite made Chris Jericho tap out to an armbar, not to be confused with the disarmer. But Chris Jericho would have his revenge, and from a scripted standpoint, I was rooting for Chris Jericho all the way because let's be honest, MJF is just that good at being a heel. I think he's better as a heel than a face. I mean, he might be a good face, but maybe he's just better off being the most hated guy ever. And which makes that victory that Chris Jericho got extra sweeter. So I really enjoyed that match, and I actually reviewed that whole pay-per-view. So if you want to check it out, go ahead. But that match was awesome, and I'm glad Chris Jericho won. I believe he made MJF tap out on that one. Before I go to number 1, let me just say, Chris Jericho is the type of person, unlike MJF, I don't know if MJF is good as a heel or face. I know he's really good as a heel. I just don't know if would be just as good as a face. But Chris Jericho is different. Chris Jericho's the type of guy that can make you hate him. He can make you like him. He's just that good. And when he's like Punk, he's the heel that when he's a heel, you can't stand him. But when he's a face, you like him. Either way, that match was awesome between those two. But it brings me to number 1. You can't talk about Chris Jericho without talking about Vengeance 2001. That was the night, of course, as we all know, that Chris Jericho defeated The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, 2 of some of the top guys of the Attitude Era. And there are a lot of great guys from the Attitude Era. Triple H, but he was injured at the time. The Undertaker, who had defeated Rob Van Dam that night. But Stone Cold and The Rock were two of the top Attitude guys at the time. And Kurt Angle was becoming one of those guys also. But Jericho defeated both those two in the same night to become the first ever undisputed heavyweight champion of WWE. So, do you agree with this list? What was your favorite Chris Jericho match? What do you think about Chris Jericho? Is he one of your favorites? Let me know what you think about this video in the comments section below. That's all the time I got for you today, and I'll be back with another review another time. Peace out, folks.